Hello guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I want to explain what is Control Rig, why you should use it, and of course we're going to go ahead and go through all the basics of Control Rig and primarily start from exporting our model from a 3D software such as Blender and then taking that into Unreal Engine and then using Control Rig to create a animation rig that we can use to animate our T-Rex. So this T-Rex might not look like the most beginner-friendly model to start with, but I will explain every step in detail from start to finish, so you don't need to worry about not knowing anything prior to watching this video. All the project files will be included free. However, if you want to just download the completed project or the Rex Control Rig that's already complete, you can download it on my Patreon or Gumroad. The link will be in the description below. And big shout out to my Patrons who support the channel. I put all of my completed projects up on my Patreon. You can get some cool stuff on there and also support the channel. So go ahead and check that out. Link in the description below. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. So if you're watching this video and you're wondering why you should use Control Rig or why you should learn it, the main benefits of using Control Rig is the fact that you can animate inside of Unreal Engine, and it's actually really easy to create a rig for your character or whatever you're making. Because I started out learning Control Rig a couple weeks ago. Just in a couple days, I was able to create a rig for this T-Rex. And honestly, I didn't have any sort of prior knowledge about rigging or any of that. So it kind of just shows how easy or how simple it is to get started and to learn the Control Rig features. Now, the main thing or the main benefit, like I said, is obviously animating an engine. That means you don't have to go back and forth through Blender or Maya or whatever 3D program that you're using, all the way back into Unreal Engine, and then say you don't like that animation, you have to go back and forth. So it just makes the pipeline a lot faster. You can also modify previous animations. Say, if you get an animation off the marketplace, you can tweak that using Control Rig. And I actually made a tutorial on that particular topic here on the channel. But the second main benefit of using Control Rig is the fact that you can use it for cinematics. So traditionally, in whatever program that you're using to create films or whatnot, say Maya or Blender, if you're rendering out some sort of short film or short movie, you have your timeline and you take all the controls, you keyframe all that stuff. You can do all the same sort of thing in Unreal Engine using Sequencer and Control Rig. You can keyframe all of the movements of your character and use Control Rig in a way that allows you to create cinematics or movies. So really, Control Rig is a powerful tool that you can use, and once you learn the basics and get a handle of it, it's really easy to get started and rig up any sort of model that you want in Unreal Engine 5. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing that I want to show off here is this Rex model that I actually downloaded off of Sketchfab. And it's a Creative Commons attribution license, so you can use it as you wish, but I'll leave a link to the artist in the description below, and I'll also leave a link to the project files for this video in the description below. But we're starting out here in Blender first to kind of show you the step-by-step process of getting a 3D model into Unreal Engine 5. So first of all, we have our Rex mesh here, and we also have all the bones. I can go into pose mode here and show you that all of the bones are rigged up. Now this model already came rigged with all the bones. Okay, so the main thing that you want to note here in a Blender is you want to have a root bone. It can be named whatever. I just named it root. And then off of that, you want to have some sort of hips bone. There's actually, if I move this, a little bone right there in the center. That is the hips control. And both of those bones will come in handy for when we set up the IK for the legs. So just note that in mind. But other than that, we can go ahead and export this model. Let's go ahead and select both the mesh and the rig. It's not really necessary, you don't have to select it, but we can go to File, export, and .fbx. So Unreal Engine only uses the .fbx file format for 3D models. And the main settings that you want to pay attention here to is, well, you can check the selected objects if you have other objects in here and you only want to export the dino. Not really necessary, like I said, but the main thing here is if you expand some of these other windows, down here in the armature tab, the main important thing to monitor is the primary bone axis and the secondary bone axes. So the primary bone, you want to change this to X, and the secondary bone you want to change this to -Y. And the reason why you want to do that is in Control Rig, it's actually a little bit picky, especially when it comes to the IK, which orientation your bones are facing. And then you also want to uncheck the add leaf bones, because that will add extra bones to your rig and you don't want any of that. And if you don't want the animation, you can uncheck the bake animation. I don't really have any animation data on this character. And we should be all good to export it. I'm just going to export it to my desktop, sk_rex, and click export. Okay, so I've created a blank project here, and then I've just created a new folder in my content drawer called Rex. Then miscellaneous, convert scene. This just makes sure that the scale is all set up right, and we can just go ahead and just click import. Okay, no smoothing group information was found. That's okay. We can ignore that warning. Okay, so we have our Rex skeletal mesh here. We also have a physics asset. So that generates every time that you import a mesh. And this is used mainly for, if you're doing ragdoll for games. Then we have the actual skeleton. So this shows all the bones. And like I said, I didn't rig this up myself, so I didn't really name all these bones. Let's go ahead and set up the material for the textures. Okay, go ahead and select all of the textures. I'll leave this link in the description below. Drag and drop them into the folder. Let's go ahead and open up the material here that it automatically created. And then we can drag and drop the textures into our material. Delete that scalar parameter, and we can hook up our base color texture. Then I believe the roughness, the normal, and the ambient occlusion. Actually, I believe this is the specular, so I think that looks about right. Go ahead and save that. Then we can go ahead and open up our Rex here. And everything looks good. So now let's go ahead and talk about Control Rig and how you can go about making a rig for your model. Okay, so there are two different ways to create a Control Rig in the content browser. The first way is you can right click and click animation and scroll down till you see Control Rig, and click Control Rig, click create. And then you're going to go ahead and assign a skeleton. We're not actually going to do it that way. Go ahead and delete this. The faster way is to just right click on the SK Rex 3D model and click create Control Rig. And there we go. We have our SK Rex Control Rig. Go ahead and double click to open that up. Let's go ahead and dock this at the top. So let's go ahead and explain the user interface of Control Rig. You're going to find that there's a lot of similarities to things like the blueprint editor. So the main thing that we have here is our viewport in the top left. So we can pan around our character. We have the WASD, all those basic controls. Then we also have all of our basic viewport controls. If you expand this larger, we also have things like our snapping settings, local and global, transform gizmo, that will come in handy later, as well as camera speed. So if you have a really small character, you can turn down the camera speed, that way you're not zooming around the scene. Okay, so I'm going to move this back like that. In the middle here we have our control rig graph. If you're familiar with blueprints, it's pretty similar, where you have, your execution pin and these simple execution lines that connect various nodes together. Then over here on the right we have the details panel. So if you select a particular node, it will show various details on that. The preview scene settings here. Basically, if you have multiple meshes that share the same skeleton, you can select a different preview mesh for that skeleton. Now down here, compiler results. Basically, this just shows you every time that you hit compile if you have any errors or anything like that. Then over here on the left, we have these 4 different windows. The main thing that you're going to be working in is in this rig hierarchy. So this will show us all of the different bones in our skeletal mesh. Then up here at the top we have our basic settings. We have compile and save. That's pretty much all the basics of the control rig editor. So let's go ahead and get started rigging up this Rex model. Now what we're going to create is we're going to add a basic root control that holds the entire mesh. We're going to add some IK for the legs. That way we can move the legs and animate, say, like a walking animation or something like that. We're going to add some controls for our tail so we can move the tail around, as well as the spine here. And then we'll also add some controls to move the mouth open and closed. So we're not going to make the most complex rig, but we're going to get all of the essential things that we're going to need to animate this T-Rex. Now, the main thing that you want to note here working in the rig hierarchy is that everything in here is based off of hierarchy. So it's really important that you understand that one principle. That means that whatever is below it is controlled by it. So for example, we have our root. Underneath our root is our hips, and underneath that is the spine, and so on. So you want to keep that in mind, that hierarchy is really important when working with control rig. Alright, so first let's go ahead and start by adding our basic hierarchy for our controls. In the rig hierarchy, what we want to do is right click off of this root, and you're going to see that we have a lot of different options here. Okay, and the main thing we're going to focus on here is this new. So off of the new here we have 3 different things that we can add. We can add a new bone, a new control, and then a new null. So the main 2 things that we're going to be using is this control. Now the control is basically a little gizmo that we can use to move around bones and to rotate and animate our model. This new null should be called a control space. I'm not sure why it's called null. I think that's either a bug, but let's just go ahead and create it. So remember, with the root selected, you want to go ahead and click new and null. Now the null is really helpful because it actually allows our controls to be placed in other locations other than on the bones. So it might not make sense at first, but you will come to understand it more and more as you get more familiar with control rig. Now right now this null, we want to go ahead, right click and rename this to root control space. And right now it is currently parented to this root bone. So underneath the root we have the root control space. So remember, hierarchy is important, because if we have this on, say, one of these tail bones or leg bones, we're not going to be able to control the root bone because it is underneath it. Okay, so now that we have our control space or our null, we want to go ahead and create a control. So you can see our control here is this tiny little sphere, and we also have this movement gizmo. So remember, if we press W, E, or R, we can toggle through our different movement tools. But right now this control is super tiny and it's just a sphere object. So we're going to go ahead and modify that mesh. So you can see here in the details we have the control selected. Let's go ahead and rename the control. So you can either right click and click rename here, or in the details panel you can select the name and rename it. Let's just rename this to root control. Compile and save that. So this will be our root control. This will move the entire mesh around. We're going to change this shape to a different object. So down here in the shape, you're going to expand this window, and under the shape properties, we can choose a different shape. So you can see here we have arrow, circle, octagon. Let's go ahead and scale this up first. So down here in the scale, we'll scale this up to 5, 5, 5. Okay, so we'll do 35. Compile and save that. Now if you go ahead and rotate that 90 degrees, you're going to see that whenever I hit compile, it resets to its original orientation. So we want to go ahead and rotate this control, and we can go ahead and in the shape transform set the rotation to 90 degrees. That way it is parallel to the ground. And now if you were to move this control or do anything with it, it's not going to do anything. So if you hit compile, it actually resets the control back to its original location. But right now our root control isn't moving our entire Rex model as it should. It's not doing anything. That's because we haven't set up any sort of nodes or blueprint logic in here to hook up or to set the location of our mesh based on this control. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So if you click on this root control here, you can drag it and drop it onto the graph. And you're going to see here we have two different options. We can get the control, or we can also set the control. For this, we want to go ahead and get it because we want to get the location of this control, and we want to set it to our T-Rex model. So if we scroll up here to the top, what we want to set the root bone. So you'll notice you can select any of these bones. You can also drag and drop them onto the graph. And then we have the two different options. We can go ahead and get the bone, or we can set the bone. In our case, we want to set the bone. And then let's go ahead and hook up the transform, the orange transform pin, into the set transform bone. So basically what we're doing is we're getting the location, rotation of our root control and setting that information to the transform of our root bone. So now we can hook up the execution node to the transform bone, compile and save that. So now if we take this root control, you see that we can move the mesh around. Now, as you can see, we're having some sort of issue where when we move the mesh around, the controls are not snapped to the exact location. And that issue has to do with our hierarchy here. So if you scroll up here to the very top, you can see we have this extra bone here. This is actually a mistake. I don't really need this extra skeletal bone. Usually you only have like one root bone. But in this case, we have the skeletal bone. And if we unexpand this root, you can see currently we have the root control space parented to the root. What we want to do is right click and click unparent. So right now the root control space is not parented to anything. So now we can move our root control around, and it isn't parented to our skeletal mesh. And we're not getting that weird issue where when we move this control around, it's not snapping to our Rex model. So now we have our very basic root control that allows us to move the entire mesh as a whole. The next main basic control that we want to add is our hips control, and this will allow us to take the Rex model and do some squats, because we'll set up the IK for the leg. But right now we just want to set up the hips. So if you scroll up here, we have this hip bone. So we can right click, add a new control, and then we can change the shape to a box thick, and then we want to go ahead and scale this up. A 20 by 20 by 20 might be good for now. So we'll go ahead and compile and say that currently we have that parented to the hips bone. What we want to do is we want to take this control and parent it to our root control, because like I said, the hierarchy is very important, and if we were to move this hips control inside of this bones hierarchy, it's not going to do what it should properly. So what we can do is right click and again unparent this, and now it's not parented to anything, so we can go ahead and parent it here to our root control, and we can go ahead and rename this to hips control. So we have our root control and our hips control, and we want to do the same exact thing here where we get the control and set the transform of our hips bone. So select the control here, go ahead and click get. So we're getting the location of our hips control, and then we'll scroll up here and select our bone hips and drag and drop it and click set, and hook up the transform and the execution pin and hit compile and save. So now we have our hips here, and you can see we also can move the entire mesh just by selecting the hips. If you hit compile at any time, it will reset it back to the default location. But right now we don't have anything else set up, and what we want is we want to set up a simple IK for our leg. That way when we move the hips control, our T-Rex can do a nice little squat and the leg will move procedurally with IK. So we can go ahead and select all these nodes and move it around. You can also select them and press C on the keyboard to add a comment. And in this case, we're just going to name this root and hips control. Okay, we can move this up like so. Now let's go ahead and add our IK. So right click in the graph, and we're going to add and search for the basic IK node. So type in basic IK. You can see we have a lot more different options, but we're going to choose here this basic IK. And now this might look really intimidating with all of these different plugs. I know there's like probably over 20 different plugs here, but we'll go and explain each and every single one of these. The very first thing that it wants us to plug in or to set are primarily these bone names. So we want to figure out which bones that we want to set up here for the leg so that we can set up an IK. A really helpful way that you can figure that out is obviously by selecting the bones, but currently that only shows us the current selected bone. So another way we could do that is by clicking this character and going to the bones and showing all hierarchy. So this will show us all the bones in our 3D model, and now we can select the individual bones and figure out which ones are which by looking at the names and whatnot. So when setting up your basic IK, you want to set item A, item B, and then the effector. So item A is referring to the bone at the top of the IK chain. So for example, we have these two bones. We want these two bones to bend back and forth. So the item A would be this top bone, which will be right up leg 56. So we can go ahead and click on the name and search for that. I'm just going to type in 56. You can see it'll pop up. And the item B will be the next bone in the chain, which in this case will be right leg 57. So go ahead and search for 57 and set that like so. And then the effector is typically the last bone in the chain, which in this case is 58. Search and set that like so. So again, we have A, B, and then the effector. So now that we've set that up, we also want to set up two more things here to actually control this IK and use this node. So we assign the different bones here. What we want to add is another one of these little controls right here, right above the ankle. That way we can bend the leg back and forth. And that will plug right into this effector. So let's go ahead and add that control. So select the right foot 58, which is our effector item. And we're going to right click and add a new control. And we can right click the name and rename this to right leg control. And under the shape properties, you want to change this to a circle thick. We want to scale this up to 5 by 5 by 5. Probably larger than that, maybe 10 by 10 by 10. Compile and save that. You can see we actually want to rotate this as well, because right now it's orientated to this bone position. But before we do that, let's go ahead and actually unparent it. Because right now it's parented to this right leg. And now you're probably wondering, why do I always right click these bones and add a new control rather than just right clicking here in the root control and adding a new control and moving it to the bone location? Now the main reason why I've been adding the controls to the bones is because you get that precise location, and also you have a lot harder time moving the controls to their appropriate locations if you add it to any other location. So now let's right click and click unparent. And what we want to do is parent the right leg control to the root control. We have the root, and we have the hips, that is a child of the root. And we also have the right leg that is a child of the root as well. Okay. Now with our right leg control selected, we can go ahead and rotate the shape. So if you press E on the keyboard, we get this little gizmo, rotation gizmo. And we can see this green y-axis. If we rotate this about -80 degrees, that should be good. So if we go into our shape transform under the rotation, we want to type in -80 and compile and save that. So now we've set up our right leg control there, and we can go ahead and plug in this control into our IK. So go ahead and select the right leg control, drag and drop it on the graph, and click Get Control, because we want to get the location of this control and plug it in for this effector. So this is controlling the IK. So right now we should be able to see the IK working in action if we go ahead and hook this execution pin up. So let's go ahead and hook that up like so. And now if we take this leg, you can see we can move the IK around and it's starting to work. Let's go ahead and hide the bones and set this back to selected only. So you can see we can start moving the IK control, and right now we're getting some behavior that we don't want. Basically the leg is twisting inward, but you can see that our IK is working, whereas we can move the leg up and down. You can see the thigh and the calf moving as well. Now one important thing to note is this gizmo. Currently it is in the local space, and whenever you're modifying or moving around a control, you actually want to move it primarily in the global space. So we can set that by expanding this window. If you take and drag this larger, you can see here we can switch between the local and global space. So currently we are in the local, and you can see that by the cube. We can change this to the global. So that allows us to have our gizmo snapped to this grid rather than orientated to the orientation of the bone. There's also a hotkey for this. You can click Control tilde on your keyboard. But we're going to leave this on global. Okay. Now let's go ahead and fix up what is doing with the knee. Basically what we want to add is we want to add another control that rotates the knee in the proper location. Because right now the basic IK node is trying to figure out where the knee should be rotated to. We want to go ahead and add what's called a pole vector to determine where our knee should be rotated or orientated to. So let's go ahead by adding that knee control. So first of all, I'm going to alt click to unhook that basic IK node. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to character mesh bones all hierarchy. And what I want to do is select this right leg 57. I want to add a control here at this knee point. Now what we want to actually do is add a new null or a new control space. And the reason why we want to do this is because whenever you're adding a control that is not snapped to a bone's location, that is out in the 3D space out here, you want to add one of these nulls or these control spaces because it allows you to transform the control based on this control space rather than the space of the mesh. Now, like I said, that might not make a whole lot of sense right now, but as you use control rig and experiment with it, you're going to notice that you actually need to use these control spaces. Okay, so we'll go ahead and right click and rename this to right knee space. We also want to add a new control under that space and right click and rename this to right knee control. So with the right knee space, we want to right click and unparent that. So it's down here. And then we want to parent this to our root control. Compile and save that. Now with our right knee control selected, we want to select the control and not the space. We can go ahead and move this out here. And we also want to scale up the control. So on the scale, let's set this at 10 by 10 by 10. Okay, that might be a little bit big. Let's actually set this to 6. And if we bring this out like so, we click compile, you're going to see that it moves back to the original location. And this is because we want to set the initial location to this current location that we have. So we can do that by going over to the transform here. And this is another important nuance to using control rig, because whenever you hit compile, it will reset the location. We want this control point to be here by default. So to do that, in the transform here under the current, we want to select the location, click copy, and in the initial, we want to actually paste that transform, compile and save that. And now this control point by default will be at this location. So let's go ahead and plug in this control, this knee control, into our pole vector. So select the right knee control, drag this and get the control. And we want to plug this in for our pole vector. As you can see, this is a transform, and the pole vector is of the type vector. So if you expand the transform, we can actually break the transformation. We have the rotation, translation, and scale. In our case, we just want the translation, and we can hook that up for our pole vector like so. And now we can hook up our basic IK. And let me go ahead and hide the bones. So now we have our knee control. So this will control the knee, rotating back and forth. You can see here we also have some weird twisting with the bones here, and something is just not right. So let's go ahead and tweak some of the IK settings. So if we expand the primary axis and the secondary axes, this actually has to do with the settings that we set in Blender. So if you remember when we did the file export FBX, we had primary bone axes and the secondary bone axes. So we set this to X and -Y. Those were our settings. So what we want to do is play around with these values. And if you click and set the Y to 0, we'll actually go ahead and fix up that twisting issue with the bones. Now you might be wondering, why don't we set this to -1? You can see here the bone is twisted. But basically what you want to do is you want to play with these primary and secondary axes values to fix up whatever issues you might have with your IK. So now we should be able to move our dinosaur's leg up and down. And you can see now our IK is working properly. We can move the leg up and down. We can also take this knee control and rotate the knee. Now we can also test our hips control. So if you take the hips control and move it up and down, you can see that our T-Rex leg and the leg IK is working properly. And basically, the T-Rex can do some squats here. We can also take the pull vector and move it back and forth. So this controls the knee. And if you, of course, hit compile or reset to the default location. So we've set up our basic IK for our leg here. Now the other thing that we want to set up for this leg is we want to go ahead and set up another IK chain. And what I mean by that is basically we can move this leg around, but we can't move this foot. Okay, so if we rotate this, you can see these toes, we have no control whatsoever. So what we want to add is another control down here that will control the bend between this bone right here and this bone. So basically another IK chain. So I know that might sound a little bit complex, but T-Rex leg is actually one of the more complex animals that you could rig, because it has basically two different IK chains. So you have this IK chain up here, and then another one from right here to right here. Okay, typically, you know, in a human or any other animal, you just have the thigh, the knee, the calf, and then the foot would be right here. But in the case with the T-Rex, you have a thigh, a calf, and then this other part, and then the foot right here. So again, it's a lot more complex, but we'll just go ahead and set up another IK chain there. That way we can get some more movement out of this rig. Okay, another thing that we want to do is we want to organize our graph here. So instead of hooking this basic IK up to this root and hips control, let's go ahead and alt click this to unhook that. And what you can do is off of the forward solve here, we can drag off here and do a sequence. And if you're familiar with blueprints, a sequence basically just gives you more execution nodes. So we'll do A, hook that up, and then B. So we'll run through the nodes and we'll basically do A, B, C, and D. And so we have our root and hips control. Then down here we want to add a comment. So select this, add a comment. So be our right leg controls. And we'll make this a little bit bigger because we're going to add a lot more logic here. And then we're going to also add the left leg controls, as well as our tail. spine, and mouth control. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish up the left leg here. So we're going to right click and add another basic IK. We're going to go ahead and click on character bones all hierarchy. So if you remember, when we figured out which bones to set in our IK, it's determined on where you want your IK chain to start. So in our case, we want it to start from this bone to this bone. This is where the bending point is. But for the item A, we want it to be set to the bone above that chain. So we have bone 57. Then item B will be right foot 58. Type in 58 here. And then the effector will be this right ball. Okay, so search for right ball 59. And again, you can look at the way we set up the other basic IK, with item A being the bone above the chain, item B being the right leg, and the effector being basically the right foot or the calf. Okay, so we're doing the same thing here where we're setting the different bones for the chain. Now what we want to do is go ahead and add our effector as well as our pole vector, which are basically our control and our knee control as well. Go ahead and select the effector bone, which in this case is our right ball 59. I want to right click and add a control. Right click, rename this to right foot control. And we want to set the scale here to 10 by 10 by 10. And the shape will be a circle thick. Okay, and it looks like we need to rotate this 90 degrees. So in our shape transform, under the rotation on the x-axis, we want to rotate this 90 degrees. This control is a little bit too small. Let's go ahead and scale it up 15 by 15. That's a little bit better. And we might want to scale this right leg control 1 up as well. 15 by 15. You can play around with the control scales and adjust that to your liking. So now we have that foot control. We want to right click on parent that. And then what we want to do is parent this to our right leg control. Because our right leg control, when we move that, we want to also move the right foot control with it. Okay, so again, this goes back to the point that the hierarchy matters, because whatever is below it will get moved with it. Okay, so we have our control here. We can go ahead and drag our right foot control, get the control, and hook up the transform up for our effector here. Now what we want to do is add our pole vector or our knee control. In this case, we want it to be right around this location, because the knee or the bending point in this case is right here. So we want our pole vector or our knee control to be right around in this location. So select this bone right here, the bone 58. We want to add a new null or a new control space. Right click and rename this to right foot space. And then right click and add a new control under that space and rename that to right foot pole. Okay, for pole vector, we can go ahead and right click the right foot space and unparent that. And now we can parent this to our root. And with the right foot pole selected, we can go ahead and move this out here. We want to scale this up to 5 by 5 by 5. And remember, if we compile and save this, it's going to reset the location of this control to its original location. So we want to go over here to the transform, to the current, copy the current location, go to the initial and right click and paste the location. Okay, that way when we hit compile it doesn't reset our location. Now we can go ahead and select our right foot pole and get the control and expand the transform. Under the translation, hook that up to the pole vector. Now we can hook up our basic IK, hook that up like so, and right away you can see that we're having some issues. So let me go ahead and show you that. So you can see that the bone is all twisted and it looks awful. So again, we want to go into our primary and secondary axes and go over to the Y on the secondary and set that back to 0. Okay, and you can see that looks all natural. So now if we take this right foot control, you can see that we have another IK chain right here. So you can see we can move our right leg control, and we can also move our right foot control. Now you might notice that this control is not moving whenever we move the foot. And again, that goes back to the fact of hierarchy. So if you look here, the right foot control is underneath the right leg control. So a child cannot move the parent. Okay? Only the parent can move the child. We also have our right foot pole vector. So basically that moves that little rotation point, and we can use that to angle that particular point to wherever we want. And now we basically have a full leg control setup. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and do the same setup for our left leg. So let's go ahead and start doing that. Start by adding the controls. I'm going to move a little bit faster here. So let's go ahead and show all hierarchy of our bones and select our left foot 47. Right click, add a new control. Go ahead and rename this. This will be renamed left leg control. Set the shape to circle thick. The scale will be 15 by 15 by 15. And our rotation will be about negative or 80 degrees on the y-axis. Compile, save that. We can right click, unparent that, and parent that to our root control. Okay, then we also want to add our left knee control. So select the left leg 47, right click, add a new null or a new control space, rename that to left knee space. Right click and add a new control under that and rename that to left knee control. Then right click the knee space, unparent that, and parent that to the root control. Compile and save that. And then select our left knee control here. Want to move this out like so. And set the scale to 6. And go to the current location, copy that, and paste that to the initial location. Compile and save that. So now let's go ahead and add another basic IK node. And we'll go ahead and set up and hook up the controls. So for the item A, we want to set that to the top bone in the chain, which is the left up leg 45. So search for 45 and plug that in. Then the first bone in the chain here, 46, left leg 46, and the effector, which is bone 47. Compile and save that. Then we want to go ahead and plug in our effector and our pull vector. So select your left leg control and drag and drop it and click Get. Hook up the transform and then select your left knee control and get that. Expand the transform. Hook the translation up for the pull vector and then hook up the basic IK node. Compile and save that. Then you can see we're getting that twisting again. So we'll go ahead and expand the primary, secondary axes, set the Y to 0, and then we'll reset that back. Go ahead and select this, add a comment. This will be a left leg controls. Go ahead and expand that because we're going to add the other second IK chain. Okay, we can go ahead and test this out. You can see that our IK is working properly. For our left leg, we can move the knee control, and all that is working good. Let's go ahead and add our foot control. So character, bones, all hierarchy. Select the left ball and add a new control. Set this to circle thick, and for the scale we'll set it to the same scale as the other one, which is 15 by 15 by 15. Rotate this by 90 degrees on the X. The name, we can rename this to left foot control. Right click, unparent that, parent that to the left leg control. So it'll be parented under the left leg control. Okay. Then let's go ahead and add our pull vector. So select the right foot 47, add a new null for the control space. Rename that to left foot space. Right click and add a new control and rename that to left foot pull. Okay, unparent the space and parent that to the root. Then select the left pull control and set the scale to 5 by 5 by 5. And we can move it out to about like that. Go to the current location, copy, and paste that to the initial location. Compile and save that. Then we should be able to add in our basic IK. For our item A, we'll go ahead and select this left up leg 47 or 46. And item B, so the first bone in the chain is 47. So remember, the bending point is right here. So you have item A, which is its top bone, the actual bending bone right here, 47, and then the effector, which will be 48. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and get our controls. So we'll go ahead and get our left knee control, and then our left foot control. Hook up the left foot control transform to the effector, and then for the left knee control, expand the transform. Hook up the translation to the pull vector, and hook up the basic IK. Then we want to go ahead and fix the twisting in that bone by just setting the secondary axis to 0. And actually I got the wrong control here. We want the left foot pull control. I want to hook that up to our pull vector. And then you want to set the secondary access to 0 there and hook this up. And that looks like that's working fine. So let's go ahead and test this out. So it looks like that is working good. Take the right foot and move that up and down. And take this pole vector, move it back and forth. Okay, so we've set up the right leg, the left leg, as well as the root and the hips. And those are probably the most complicated ones out of all of them. Just setting up the IK. So you can see here now we can move our Rex up and down. See the IK working properly. You can also move the root, and that moves the entire rig as a whole. And we have all of that set up. So next up, what we want to go ahead and do is set up our tail control so that we can rotate the entire tail as a whole with one control. So let's go ahead and go into character, show the bones here. So for our tail, I want to go ahead and select this bone right here, BN tail 0268. So right click and add a new null and rename this to tail control space. Right click the space and add a new control, and we can rename this to tail control. Okay, and let's go ahead and scale this up 10 by 10 by 10. I want to change this to a circle, half circle thick. Okay, it's still not showing, so let's go ahead and scale this up to 30 by 30 by 30. And we want to rotate this 90 degrees. So we'll go ahead and rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees. Okay, so there's our tail control. Let's actually scale this down maybe 10 on the X. And we can set this to like a blue color or something like that. Basically, this control is going to control the entire tail. The node that we're going to use here is called distribute rotation. So this will allow us to add all of these bones in here and distribute a rotation based on this single control. So let's go ahead and add the items that we want. So this is an array. If you click the plus button, it will add a new item. In this case, you can select the type and you can choose bone, control, or whatever. In our case, we want to use the bones because we want to specify each bone in the chain. Tail bones, all these tail bones, we want to add a array item per each bone. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go ahead and add 6 of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the array starts at 0, so technically it'll go all the way up to 5. But you have a total of 6 here. Okay, and for the types, we want to set them all to bones. And then we want to set the bone names. So we have tail 69. And then we have 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. Compile and save that. And now all we have to do is hook in and add our control. So under the rotations here, we want to click this plus button to add a rotation. And if we get our tail control and drag and drop this and click get, if you expand the transform here, we have this rotation that we can use to plug in for the rotation of all these bones. So let's go ahead and hook up the execution pin. And I believe what's going on here is we want to set this global space to local space. So we want to change this from global to local. That way it will take the local transform of this control. So now you can see just by selecting this one control here, we can rotate it. We can rotate the entire tail as a whole. So we're going to rotate it back and forth. We can also rotate it up and down. And this is just super helpful because we can, just by adding one control, control a whole chain of bones. Now we're also going to add in individual bones or individual controls per each bone. That way, if you really wanted to still have that individual control over posing the tail in whatever position that you want, you could still have that by adding those individual controls. So we'll go ahead and add that as well. So let's go ahead and add a comment here. This will be our tail controls. And we can go ahead and expand this a little bit larger, because we're going to add in those tail controls. Okay. Now for the tail controls, it's actually quite simple. What we're doing is we're just adding a control per each bone, and then we're setting the bone transform to that control. So it's the same sort of principle that we're doing here, that we did here at the top, where we're getting the root control and setting it to the root bone. We're basically doing the exact same thing for this entire chain of bones. A real quick and easy way adding controls is to just select the tail, shift select all of these bones here, and right click and add a new add controls for selected. So this will batch add all of these controls, and I actually accidentally added 2, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete all these. But down here on the bottom you can see we've added all of these controls per each bone. So we have all the different controls here. Let's go ahead and shift select these and add a circle thick and scale this up to 10 by 10, and we want to, I believe, rotate that 90 degrees on the Y, something like that. So because we have all these selected, we're doing them all at the same time, and we might want to adjust the scale of, say, this control. So we want to select that one individually and scale that up to 15 by 15 by 15, maybe a little bit higher, maybe like 20 by 20. Select this one. This can be 18 by 18 by 18, and then this one maybe can be like 15 by 15 by 15, something like that. We can also scale up the thickness of these circles. So if I select all these, I'm going to set the Z value here on the scale to 60. You can see that adds just a little bit more thickness to the controls. That way it's a little bit easier to see. Also give us a little bit of a color coding. So we're going to do like an orange color here. This one can be like a yellow. This one down here can be sort of a greenish color. Just that way it breaks up the color for all the different controls. Okay, something like that. And so now we have all of our different controls here. The thing is, we want to go ahead, parent these to the right controls. So right click. So we want to select these and parent this to tail 69. Okay, so we have the tail 69 control parented to the tail bone 69, and then we want to take the 7 tail 70 control, parent it to the tail 70, take the tail 71 and parent that to the 71, 72, 72, 73 to 73, and 74 to 74. So basically what we're doing is we're parenting all the controls individually to each bone. And again, this is important because you want to remember the golden rule of control rig is to remember your hierarchy. Okay. So now let's go ahead and set our bone locations to these controls. So a neat way is you can shift select all these, drag it on the graph and just click Get, and you'll automatically get all the controls that you want. Then for the bones, you just shift select the bones, drag and drop that, and get all the bones. Okay, so we can go ahead and select all these, and actually want to set all the bones, not get them. So we have all these setters right here, and then we can go ahead and plug in all of the controls. So we can just put these all underneath bones. And then all you have to do is plug in the transforms and hook up the execution pins for each of these controls. Okay, we'll go ahead and compile and save that. And I might have dragged the wrong control here. So 69, 69, and 70. This needs to be set to 70. 71, this needs to be set to 71. 72, 72, and 73, and 74, and 74. Okay, so make sure you hook up the right bones, the right controls to the right bones. Okay, so now we have these individual controls. So if we select any of these controls, we can rotate that particular bone, and you can see it also rotates all of the controls that are below it. So again, remember the hierarchy, because those controls are below it, these controls are parented to these bones. That means that they will move with the bones, and everything below it will move accordingly. Okay. We can also select our tail control, and you can see that our controls still move with the bones even when we move our tail control. So it's basically having the best of both worlds, where you can modify the entire tail by using this one control, or you can get more of a precise placement if you want to get a really precise pose of the tail. And that's just simply using the get transform control and setting the transform of the bone. The same exact thing that we did here for the hips and the root bones. Okay, so that's basically all of our tail controls. We're going to do sort of the exact same thing for the spine. So we're going to add another one of these spine controls to add a easy one control for the spine, as well as all these individual controls so that we can get a finer movement of our character's spine. Another thing that's been bugging me is these leg controls. I want to up the thickness here to say 50. And of course you guys can customize these to your liking. If you don't like the circle shape, you can change the shape to whatever you want. And also you can change the colors and all that stuff. Alright, so let's go ahead and work on the spine. So we're going to do the same thing what we did here with the distribute rotation. So very first thing is we're going to add our main control, which is right here on spine 1. Actually, we can add it right here at the hips location. Just right click and add first a new null and rename this to spine control space. Under that, we want to add the new control and rename this to spine control. And for the shape, we can change this to circle thick. And for the scale, I'm just going to copy the same scale from our tail control. So right click, copy, and right click, paste, and rotate this 90 degrees. I believe we want actually the half circle thick. Okay. And rotation 0, -90. There we go. So we have a spine control there. You could change the color. Now we have to go ahead and right click and distribute rotation. Add another one of these nodes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different bones here. So go ahead and add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different array elements. Then we can go ahead and set these all to bones. And for the first bone, we're going to do spine 1_5, spine 2_6, and then neck _7. Like I said, these are random bone names. If you wanted to, you could take this into Blender and rename all the bones, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. Okay, 1_8, and then neck 2_9, and then head 10. Okay, and we add a rotation down here, and we just have to select our spine control, get the control, expand the transform, and hook up the rotation to the rotation, and then get our execution pin and plug that in. Okay, you can see it's all messed up because we want to set the space back to local space, very important. And now we should be able to take the spine and rotate it up and down. Now, one thing that you might notice is the grid snapping as well as the rotation. You see it's rotating in this weird angle. Okay, so we can disable the rotation snapping here, and now we have a smoother grid snapping. Now, if I change this to local, we're kind of getting like this sort of bend in the head, and either that can be due to the way that this rig is set up, and I think that might be due to the fact that we added this spine control on the hips rather than the spine one. So let's go ahead and right click this spine control and unparent that, and let's reparent it to the spine one. Let's go ahead and see if that fixes that. Nope. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure why the transformation rotating in this non-uniformal transformation. So again, it's like angled, weird. Not entirely sure why it's doing that, but I guess you could rotate and adjust it by just using these rotation tools. So there is our spine control. We're going to add in the same sort of controls that we added for the tail. So the individual bone controls. So we can select our spine 1_5 to the head, and right click new, add controls for selected. And if we scroll down, we have all the controls down here. Shift to select all those, and we want to scale this up to 10 by 10 by 10. Actually, maybe 15 by 15 by 15. Set these to circle thick, and rotate this 90 degrees on the Z, maybe on the Y. This individual control here, we might want to rotate this, maybe something like that. So 90 and the X and 90 on the Y. Let's reselect all these. Let's make them a little bit larger, 20 by 20 by 20. And we can up the thickness here to 50. And we can select the individual controls here and set the colors. Set this to orange, yellow, then green, then blue, darker blue, and purple. And you don't have to make all these controls per each individual bone. Like I said, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. It's totally up to you. And we can tweak the size of this 18 by 18 just so it is a little bit more smaller. Okay, so that should be fine for now. We have all those controls down here. we want to go ahead and parent the spine 1 all the way up to the spine 1_5. So now it is parented there. And let's go ahead and collapse everything underneath. Now it's parented there. And we want to select spine 2_6 and parent that to spine 2_6. Neck _7 control, parent that to neck _7. Neck 1_8, parent that. You just want to go in here and parent all these controls to their respective bones. So that should be all good and set up. And now we can shift select these controls and drag and click Git. And then we want to shift select the spine 1_5 all the way to 10 and set the bones. Okay, so I'm going to move this back like this and then drag all these controls and hook all these up. So the spine 1_5 to 6, neck 7, neck 1_8, neck 2_9, and then the head. And we can start just hooking all the execution pins and transforms up here. And compile and save that. Let's just go ahead and add a comment. And this will be our spine controls. So let me go ahead and unhide the bones here. So we have our basic spine control that controls the entire spine chain. So I can move it up. You can see the controls are moving along with the bones. And then we can take the individual controls, and if we wanted to rotate the head to a certain rotation, you can see we can rotate the head, rotate the neck. So you can take the individual controls and rotate them back and forth. And I'm just going to do a little bit more tidying up here with the head control. And scale this down a little bit. And so we have the feet, we have our tail, and we have our spine. Last thing that we want to add is just a very simple jaw control. That way we can close and open the mouth. Again, all this will be is a simple control that we can use to rotate the jaw up and down. So select jaw 11 here. I'm going to add a new control, and then we can go ahead and get the control and then get our jaw bone and set that to the transform of that bone. Okay, and we just need to click on our jaw control here, and we can actually just rename this jaw control. In the shape, we can change this to a circle. Okay, and actually I just added a box here, whatnot. So you can really add whatever sort of controls that you want. Whatever looks best, I guess. Like I said, I'm not like an expert rigging by any means, but basically we have our full control set up. So now what we could do is take our Rex control rig and drop it into the level, and it actually creates a sequencer here that we can use to animate our T-Rex. So you can take things and create a very basic walking animation, or what you could do for fun is you can take this Rex and move him over here and just add a really cool pose. So we can take this foot, move it up like so, move it over, take the knee control and move that over, that over like so. You can take your tail control and rotate it whatever direction that you want. Then we can take the spine control and move the Rex in like that. And rotate the head. And do something like that. And there we go. We can go ahead and hide control shapes. So you can see we have a Rex here posed. And I know this has been quite a long video just showing you how to get this Rex model set up with control rig, set up all the controls and all that stuff. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll make a follow-up video showing how we can go ahead and animate this and use what's called sequencer to either create some sort of walk animation that we can use for games, or we can go ahead and use sequencer to animate the Rex for, say, a short film. But yeah, that's pretty much how you use control rig in regards to rigging up a 3D model or character. Hopefully this video helped you learn something about how to set up, your IK for the legs, as well as how you can go about setting up some basic controls for rotating some of the bones in your model, as well as explaining sort of the hierarchy system of control rig and all the bits of information that you might need to know, such as using the control spaces and manipulating all of the little control gizmos and all that stuff. But anyways, let me know if you guys have any questions down in the comments down below, or any suggestions or feedback or whatnot. Like I said, if you want to download the full completed Rex control rig, I'll leave a link on my Patreon or Gumroad in the description below, and you can support the channel there, and it helps out a lot to keep tutorials and things like this free here on the channel. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.